And from hair fashion, we move to fashion itself. I'm sure if I mention hibiscus swallow, my rival's eye, my capable husband, or Michelle Obama's bag, you'll immediately guess that I want to talk about wax fabric and its rich patterns. I guess Cindy Olohou, collection manager at a contemporary art museum in Ile-de-France, Paris, is actually the co-curator of the wax exhibition being held in Paris until September. She told Laurence Soustras about the genesis of this event that traces the origins of the famous fabric. Take a look. Cindy Olohou, hello and welcome to Initiative Africa. You are the co-curator of the exhibition at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris dedicated to wax fabric. Could you tell us about the genesis of this event? How did this exhibition come about?
The exhibition originated from an idea proposed by the Musée de l'Homme. Then, we worked as a team of 4 curators with Soloba Diakite, Manuel Valentin, and Mary Merlin to develop a 2-part exhibition. The first part traces the history of wax fabric, giving visitors an overview of this textile's unique story and characteristics. The second part is more contemporary, featuring invitations to modern designers and artists to explore wax fabric's place in contemporary creation.
Wax fabric is of course very well known by African viewers. However, in Africa itself, its origins, which come from far beyond the continent, are often less well understood.
Yes, what's important to note is that wax fabric was from the beginning an industrial commercial product created in a colonial context. It was inspired by Indonesian batik from Java, Asia, a traditional fabric from that region that uses wax to draw patterns before printing colors onto the fabric. The Dutch decided to mechanize and industrialize Indonesian batik production, initially targeting Java, Indonesia. But in reality, it was a complete failure. The Indonesians rejected wax fabric mainly because the industrialized process couldn't exactly match the finish of local batiks. Moreover, quotas and customs duties made industrial batik much more expensive. At that point, the Dutch decided to redirect the export of these fabrics to the African colonies.
Specifically, how did it arrive in Africa?
Indeed, through the Dutch. This happened in a strong colonial context and also through battalions of Ghanaian soldiers who were deployed in Indonesia under Dutch command.
Did Africans immediately embrace it, or was there an adaptation period? Do we know?
It was an immediate success. It appealed right away to the African social elite. While it was a colonial import, it truly became integrated, spreading through local elites to the wider population. In our exhibition, we show this through an appliqué piece from parasols that accompany kings and chiefs, an ancient sewing technique still used today. The reverse side of this appliqué features a wax pattern called the king's shoes. So wax fabric was really introduced through these elites before spreading and becoming widely popular. There was also extensive work on patterns, which Dutch companies, but not only Dutch, there were British and Swiss firms too, hiring designers to create patterns specifically for African customers.
And this work would become crucial in Africa.
What's certain is that there was immediate work on the patterns, notably through Scottish merchant Ebenezer Brown Fleming, who quickly designed patterns specifically for the African continent. So it wasn't just Indonesian patterns appearing on wax fabric anymore, but patterns created specifically for Africa. Take the hand pattern, for example, one of the oldest designs created in 1895, near the end of the 19th century, which is still in production today. There was a real effort to adapt patterns specifically for the African customers who were being targeted.
And the Nana bands themselves contributed significantly to the creation of these patterns.
Yes, particularly from the 50s through the 80s, and there's a new generation of Nana bands today. True entrepreneurs who were wax fabric resellers. They had an extremely powerful impact on the distribution and popularization of certain patterns. It's important to understand that when wax fabrics are produced, the patterns only have numbers, not names, when they leave the factory. It was these women resellers who gave them names connected to women's issues and their customers' concerns. So we have patterns like my rival's eye, the family, or my husband is capable, which became extremely famous because these Nana bands gave them these names.
Cindy, Olohou, when we talk about wax fabric, it goes well beyond textiles, since we must also discuss both European manufacturers like Vlisco and the African ones, and perhaps the different quality categories that we find in the market. What is the significance of this economic aspect?
The economic aspect has been essential from the very beginning in wax fabric's history, since it was originally an industrial commercial product made at scale, unlike batik, its inspiration, which is handmade using traditional techniques. Wax was a commercial industrial product from the start. So there's this strong economic dimension from the fabric's origins, which was primarily European. It is important to note, with sales and exports targeting the African continent. In the 50s and 60s, we saw nationalization of wax production developed in West African countries like Senegal with Sotiba Simpafric, and also in Benin and Côte d'Ivoire. Uniwax, for example, was created in 1967 and remains one of the factories still producing wax in Africa using cotton mainly from Benin. But from the 90s, with the CFA franc devaluation, these companies face many difficulties, so wax production in Africa today is relatively minor compared to all the wax consumed or purchased on the African continent. Today, most production happens in Asia. This economic dimension is surely part of this fabric's story. An industrial and commercial textile whose production locations have evolved significantly over time, responding to global economic challenges in textile exports and production.
Les exportations de tissus et les productions de tissus ont fait face à l'échelle mondiale.
Regarding the various qualities of wax that exist, it is important to note that wax, by its technique, is printed on both sides. The wax is deposited on both sides, the fabric is then dyed, and each color corresponds to a dye or color impression. If it's only on one side, we call it fancy. This is an important distinction because we tend to call all fabrics with these types of bright patterns and colors wax. In reality, true wax must be printed on both sides. That's already a quality difference. Then we have quality differences in the cotton thickness used. Quality also depends on the number of impressions and colors present in the fabric. More colors typically mean higher quality or at least a higher price. For example, Vlisco has developed a whole range with wax, super wax, and other lines like royal satin, where you see elements like shine and embossing. These additional features to basic wax fabrics also increase the precious nature or cost of the fabric.
Since 2004 and the liberalization of textile trade by the WTO, there has been much discussion about the influx of lower quality wax fabrics and counterfeits. What exactly is this about, and what constitutes a counterfeit wax fabric?
First, there's this fundamental point that for true wax fabric, the textile must be printed on both sides. If it's only printed on one side, that's what we call fancy. That's a good starting point. Then, regarding counterfeiting, what's not widely known unless you've studied wax fabric closely is that the patterns are created by textile designers and each one is registered. For example, Vlisco uses copper rollers. The patterns are engraved on these copper rollers covered in wax, which allows the wax to be deposited on the fabric before it's dyed. So these patterns are registered. They belong to the textile designer with a number, creation date, and the company they work for. Now that the market is open, we see many copies. You can find patterns that normally belong to Vlisco, who owns the largest known stock of wax patterns, being historically one of the oldest producers, being produced by wax factories in Asia, for instance, who don't own the rights to these patterns. This is what we mean by counterfeiting. These patterns rightfully belong to Vlisco.
Beyond the economic sphere, the cultural dimension of wax fabric has become unavoidable in recent years, and this exhibition precisely traces this very strong connection. How would you describe this particular cultural bond?
Yes, and I should emphasize that this was really important for us in the exhibition, not to just stick to historical facts about wax fabric's story, but to address its cultural place and its multiple cultural roles depending on where you are, who you are, what your family history is. Because the whole paradox of wax fabric is that while it's a colonial, commercial, imported textile, it has become so deeply woven into recent African history and people's daily lives that it holds a very special place in events like weddings, baptisms, and there's also this whole dimension of generational transmission, especially among women who pass down their collection of wax fabrics from mothers to daughters, from grandmothers to granddaughters. So there's really this intimate familial dimension, a heritage, or perhaps we should say matrilineal heritage that accompanies wax fabric.
It has also become a very strong link between Africa and its diaspora.
Yes, which is why it's also a fabric that sparks debate. Some rejected it completely, accusing it of taking the place of truly African original textiles. Yet at the same time, there's been an enormous spread of wax fabric throughout the diaspora, where it has become a symbol of identity, belonging, and pride in African heritage, even taking on a Pan-African dimension, as wax touches so many African countries, albeit differently. It's not worn the same way in the East Africa and in West Africa, but you can find wax everywhere. As a result, it has become a powerful vehicle for the diaspora, a means of empowerment, pride, cultural assertion, and connection to the history of a continent that is sometimes very distant, both geographically and in terms of family and personal histories.
Finally, what future do you see for wax fabric? Is there a risk of rejection because it's perceived as colonial? Or is it, on the contrary, experiencing a renaissance because it has entered a creative imagination simply because it's fashionable? What future do you envision for wax?
That's a very good question, and I thank you for asking it because I think this is really the crucial debate. Once we've established the foundations of what we wanted to convey through this exhibition, I believe what makes wax fabric unique is that each artist, each designer has their own particular relationship with it, and I couldn't definitively say where wax future lies. I think it will exist between two poles, the rejection by some in favor of more locally rooted expressions or pre-colonial African textile traditions like Bogolan, which are more deeply embedded in African continental history.
Beaucoup plus ancré dans l'histoire du continent africain. Et en même temps,
Yet, at the same time, some artists today have moved beyond the question of wax Africanness, if I may say so, to use it as a tool, a medium to address more global issues like the environment, ecology, and fast fashion.
Beaucoup plus global comme l'environnement, l'écologie, la fast fashion, parce que
being an industrial product made at a scale, supplying an entire continent and its diaspora, and even beyond Africa today, it raises questions about rapidly changing collections, water usage in textile printing, and the reuse of all this produced wax.
Du réemploi de tout ce wax qui est produit.
Issues that are much broader and more far-reaching than just identity claims or rejection of the fabric's history. I think this is where wax fabric's strength lies, in this paradox and ambivalence. It has truly become a tool for artists and designers to spread ideas, make statements, and communicate. Because of this whole history of patterns and messages conveyed through wax, I believe that whatever its future holds, it has a bright future ahead.